My son pulled a terrifying prank at school, and I couldn't stop laughing. This is a story about the day my son faked a school shooting and how, in the end, I laughed my ass off. I was at work, deep in thought with a patient, when my phone buzzed. It was Miss Williams, my son's teacher. Her voice was an icy whisper on the other end, slicing through my afternoon calm. Mrs. Last name, your son, Joey, has staged an active shooter incident. You need to come immediately. My blood ran cold. Joey, my Joey, the kid who reminded me to put my seatbelt on, who followed every rule, who stressed over a B-. My mind reeled. I almost choked on the air in my lungs. Leaving 3 bewildered patients in the waiting room, I tore out of there. The drive to Central High usually took 30 minutes, but that day, I made it in 20, my heart hammering against my ribs the entire time. Panic clawed at my throat. When I arrived, the scene was chaos. Students shivering in gym shorts outside, huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Parents were frantic, teachers doing their best to console them, their faces a mix of terror and exhaustion. And then I saw him, my son, sitting on the curb, his wrists bound with zip ties, surrounded by officers, looking utterly defeated. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Inside the principal's office, the accusations hit like a barrage of bullets. Your son brought a replica firearm onto campus. He emailed threats to teachers from an anonymous account. He triggered fire alarms and shouted warnings. Students cowered under desks for 40 minutes. Mrs. Last name. Police entered classrooms with guns drawn. He terrorized this entire community. The words kept coming, each one a fresh stab. And the worst part? I couldn't even defend him. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Photos of a black pellet rifle, copies of menacing emails, grainy CCTV footage showing someone eerily resembling Joey in the hallway just moments before the chaos. Other parents started filing in for an emergency meeting, their faces twisting from pity to outright disgust when they heard Joey's name. One mother actually stepped back from me, as if my son's alleged madness might be contagious. I knelt in front of Joey, oblivious to the glares of the officers, to the hushed whispers of the parents, to the churning fear in my own gut. Joey, I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. What did you do? What? His wrists flexed against the harsh plastic ties, but his eyes, clear and unwavering, locked onto mine. Because no one listened, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I watched, mesmerized, as my straight-A, rule-following son transformed before my eyes into a prosecutor, meticulously presenting his case. On October 4th, he began, I was fixing computers in the media lab when I noticed Larry, the assistant principal, had left his desktop unlocked. There were video thumbnails visible on his screen. Girls in the locker room, taken from multiple angles during practice hours. My breath hitched. He paused, his gaze fixed on some painful memory. I took screenshots of everything, reported it to Vice Principal Garcia within 10 minutes. He shifted slightly in his chair, the zip ties digging into his skin. She told me I must have misunderstood, warned me about spreading dangerous rumors that could ruin careers. The principal, who had been listening with a scowl, moved closer, but Joey didn't flinch. On October 20th, he continued, 3 girls from the swim team, the O'Brien twins and Yasmin Ali, they went to Coach Williams. Said they felt like someone was watching them during practice. He dismissed their concerns as paranoia, told them to focus on improving their times instead of making up stories. I recognized those names. Strong swimmers, all of them. So, obviously, I emailed the school board with the screenshots. He clenched his hands, the restraints cutting deeper. They didn't even bother responding. It took 2 weeks for an automated reply saying my message would be reviewed at their next meeting. By the way, if you're still with me and on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable stories like this are definitely coming. Joey pressed on, his voice gaining a chilling resolve. On November 15th, my friend Emma suddenly quit the swim team. She wouldn't explain why, but started having panic attacks whenever she had to go near the pool for PE. 2 more girls quit that week, and Coach Williams told everyone they were weak. The room had fallen silent. Even the officers seemed to be holding their breath. Last Thursday, I stayed late for robotics club. Around 9 p.m., I saw Larry in the girls' locker room with a ladder, adjusting something in the ceiling tiles. He finally looked directly at me then. and I could see the immense weight of what he'd been carrying. The unspoken terror. "Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking. "CIA just made JV swimming. She's 13 years old." The words hung heavy in the air, the implication a devastating blow. My mind flashed to sweet, bubbly CIA, full of dreams. I wasn't going to wait until it was her turn to be victimized, Joey said, his eyes now blazing with fierce determination. I knew a lockdown would bring police, not just school administrators. I wanted full SWAT teams and bomb squads to search every inch of the building. They wouldn't be able to quietly remove the cameras before independent investigators found them. I couldn't make anyone care any other way. The principal's face drained of all color when an officer returned, a crackle from his radio echoing in the sudden quiet. "Sir, during the sweep, the team found hidden devices in the girls' locker room ceiling. Looks like cameras. A lot of them." 3 days later, FBI agents carried out 17 cameras and boxes of memory cards. 6 years of footage. 67 victims were identified. Larry had done this at 3 different schools before. Joey never got his scholarship back. The expulsion stuck. MIT, it turned out, doesn't admit students who once caused a fake school shooting, no matter how noble their intentions. But I didn't care, because one way or another, they were going to pay. I'd make sure of it. That evening, after the FBI finished hauling out the last box of evidence, Joey and I sat at our kitchen table. The overhead light made everything look too bright, too harsh. The house felt empty, even though nothing had been taken from us. Just that heavy, unsettling silence that comes after cops and agents have been through your space. Joey's wrists had angry red marks from the zip ties, and he kept rubbing them, a subconscious gesture of lingering discomfort. We didn't talk for almost an hour, just sat there, cold coffee getting colder while the microwave clock blinked 12 o'clock, because I'd never fixed it after the last power outage. Finally, I grabbed a legal pad from the junk drawer and slammed it on the table, hard enough to make Joey jump. "We're going to write down everything," I told him, my voice firm, shaking with a cold, clear fury. "Every single report you made, every meeting, every adult who ignored you. Because if they thought they could sweep this under the rug after what you gave up, they had another thing coming." Joey nodded slowly, and then, as I wrote dates and times and names, filling page after page until my hand cramped, he started talking. The next morning, my phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. message after message. Most were from parents, calling Joey a terrorist, demanding we leave town, saying he was as dangerous as any real shooter. But between all that hate, 3 different moms texted me to say their daughters had finally told them what happened in that locker room. They wanted me to know they were grateful, even if they couldn't say it publicly. I screenshot every single message, the ugly ones and the grateful ones, saving them in a folder I labeled evidence. Because you never know what you'll need later. By Friday, the official letter came from the school district. A thick envelope, their logo stamped on it, like they were proud of what was inside. The hearing notice called Joey a violent hoax perpetrator and said he posed an ongoing risk to student safety. And I actually laughed out loud, standing at the kitchen counter, a bitter, hollow laugh. Because they were still more worried about covering their own asses than admitting what they'd allowed to happen for years. That weekend, I barely slept. Instead, I spread papers across the dining room table, creating a meticulous timeline. Every email Joey sent, every meeting he requested, every dismissal from every adult who should have protected those girls. The folder grew thicker and thicker with screenshots, dates, and names of people who'd failed these kids. Joey helped me organize it all into tabs while we listened to true crime podcasts. Somehow, it felt appropriate. Monday morning, I drove to Helena Frey's office in the fancy part of downtown. Marble lobbies, security guards who looked at you funny if you weren't wearing a suit. Helena specialized in Title IX violations and institutional negligence. She reviewed our documentation with these sharp, hawkish eyes, flipping through pages faster than I thought anyone could read, then stopping to tap certain parts with her pen, already seeing angles and strategies the school district wouldn't expect. After 2 hours, Helena leaned back in her leather chair. "Joey's good intentions won't erase the policy violations," she explained, the harsh reality sinking in. "The expulsion will probably stick, no matter how right he was about Larry." But then her voice got an edge to it, like she'd been waiting for a case like this. "However, there are paths forward for holding the adults accountable. the ones who ignored clear warning signs. That afternoon, Gustavo Fitch from the FBI called about maintaining chain of custody for all our evidence, warning me that any media attention could mess up a criminal case against Larry. I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. All I wanted was to scream the truth from every rooftop in town. But I knew he was right. When Jamal Goldman from the local paper called 20 minutes later, I declined an on-record interview. But I made sure to casually mention how interesting it was that the school board hadn't said one word about Joey's prior reports to administrators. I could hear him typing on the other end, and he said he'd do some digging. Exactly what I'd hoped. 2 days later, the district spokesperson, Emerson Hartley, released a statement, praising the school's swift cooperation with law enforcement and talking about their commitment to student safety. Not a single mention that Joey had tried to report this for months before taking desperate action. My hands shook with fresh anger reading it on my phone. I had to walk around the block 3 times before I trusted myself not to drive to his office and tell him exactly what I thought of his PR spin. Meanwhile, CIA had started refusing to go to PE class, too scared of the locker room, even though all the cameras were gone. Her mom called me, crying, because she didn't know how to help her daughter feel safe again. I emailed CIA's counselor that same day, requesting accommodations for her, determined to protect at least one kid from more trauma, since the adults at that school had already failed so spectacularly. The next week, Joey's expulsion pre-meeting happened in the very same conference room where they'd first accused him. The principal sat across from us, tapping his pen on a stack of papers, droning on about disruption to the learning environment and how Joey's actions traumatized hundreds of students. I cut him off. I want copies of every incident report filed in the past year. His pen stopped tapping. He stammered that those were confidential personnel matters. Joey's reports about Larry weren't confidential when he made them. I shot back. So why would other reports be different now? The principal's face flushed red, and he shuffled through his papers faster. He kept saying Joey violated 17 different policies and created an unsafe environment. I kept asking about the unsafe environment Larry created for 6 years. The meeting ended with nothing resolved, but I saw how his hands shook when I mentioned getting my own lawyer. Helena worked fast after that meeting. She sent formal preservation letters to the district and school board by certified mail, explaining they were legally required to maintain all documents related to Larry's employment and any complaints filed during his time there. The letters warned about criminal penalties for destroying evidence. She made sure copies went to every board member's home address, too. No convenient computer crashes or missing files allowed. She also filed notices with their insurance companies, knowing they'd want to protect their own interests. 3 days later, I sat in the courthouse for Larry's arraignment. He wore a cheap suit, his head down, while his lawyer entered a not guilty plea. The judge set bail at $200,000. In the hallway afterward, I overheard 2 prosecutors talking about similar patterns at previous districts. One mentioned something about a school in Ohio, another in Tennessee. My stomach turned, thinking about all those girls, all those years, all those adults who must have known something. That same afternoon, I drove to the district office and filed public records requests for Larry's complete hiring file and any complaints filed during his employment. The clerk behind the desk took my forms without making eye contact, her expression telling me she'd been expecting someone like me. She stamped the papers and gave me a receipt that said they had 30 days to respond. I filed the same request with his 2 previous school districts that day. The next morning, Joey's MIT Scholarship Committee sent an email. No phone call, no meeting, just a cold, impersonal email saying his admission was withdrawn, pending outcome of criminal proceedings. No opportunity for a hearing or explanation. Joey read it on his phone at breakfast, and his face just crumbled. I held him while he cried for the first time since this whole thing started. His whole body shook, and he kept saying he knew this would happen, but he did it anyway. All those years of perfect grades, robotics competitions, and science fairs, gone, because he couldn't let them hurt CI. Helena came by that afternoon to discuss our options. She sat at our kitchen table with her legal pad and explained how civil cases like ours could take years to resolve. She warned about possible retaliation from the district, sudden code enforcement on our house, problems with my nursing license. She said they'd try to make our lives difficult enough that we'd give up. I told her I had nothing but time, and nothing left to lose. Joey had already lost MIT, so what else could they take? That evening, Joey finally opened up about the moment he decided the fake shooting was his only option. He was sitting in robotics club, working on servo motors, when he saw CIA walk past the door with her swim bag. She was laughing with her friends, excited about making the team. He said he kept thinking about Emma's panic attacks and the other girls who quit. He thought about those thumbnails on Larry's computer. His voice broke when he said he couldn't let CIA become another Emma. He couldn't sit there building robots while knowing what was waiting for her in that locker room. He said he tried everything else first, but nobody would listen. A week later, the district denied our records request, citing personnel privacy exemptions. Helena had expected this and immediately prepared an appeal with more specific, targeted requests they couldn't legally refuse. She requested records of any complaints specifically related to student safety, any disciplinary actions taken, and any communications between administrators about Larry. She knew how to word things to get around their exemptions. While Helena fought the legal battles, Jamal published his first article explaining Title IX obligations and how schools are legally required to investigate reports of sexual harassment. He laid out the timeline of Joey's reports and the administration's failures to act. The comment section started shifting from anger at Joey to questions about the administration. Parents wanted to know what else had been ignored. Some started sharing their own stories about complaints that went nowhere. The article got picked up by the state education blog and then by a national education website. 2 days after the article came out, Gustavo called from the FBI. He explained that identifying victims across multiple schools had triggered additional federal resources. They were bringing in specialists who dealt with institutional abuse cases. He said they'd found similar patterns at Larry's previous schools, and the investigation was expanding. He asked for patience while they built an airtight case. He said these things took time, but they were taking it seriously. I forced myself to trust the process, even though every day felt like a year. 3 weeks passed before Joey's expulsion hearing finally got scheduled. The district sent us a thick packet of procedures and warnings about recording devices not being allowed. Helena reviewed everything with us the night before, marking key points with sticky notes and reminding Joey to stay calm no matter what they said. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, just a conference table with district officials on one side and us on the other. The district counsel started immediately, his voice sharp as he read from prepared notes about the panic Joey caused and how SWAT teams had to clear every classroom with weapons drawn. He kept using words like terroristic and malicious, while Joey sat perfectly still beside me. When it was finally Joey's turn to speak, he pulled out a folder and started reading dates and times in a steady voice. October 4th, 2:47 p.m. Initial report to Vice Principal Garcia about explicit images on Larry's computer. October 6th, 8:15 a.m. Follow-up email with screenshots attached. October 20th, 3:30 p.m. Documented conversation with principal about swim team concerns. November 2nd, formal complaint to the school board with evidence. November 15th, second complaint with additional documentation. The district council tried to interrupt, but Joey just kept reading, his voice never changing as he listed every single attempt he made to report what was happening. My chest felt tight watching my son lay out proof that nobody listened until he forced them to. The hearing ended without any decision, just a promise they'd notify us within 5 business days. That afternoon, Helena got copies of all the documents the district submitted as evidence, and I spent hours going through every page, looking for anything we could use. That's when I found it, buried deep in Larry's personnel file. A tiny footnote referencing an alternative professional reference from his previous district instead of the standard recommendation letter. I showed Helena, and she immediately added it to our list of records to request, saying those alternative references usually meant something went wrong but got covered up. Joey helped me organize the papers, and that's when he started talking about MIT for the first time since the rejection came. He said he didn't really miss the school itself, or even the prestige of going there. What hurt was losing the robotics team he'd been planning to join, the kids who thought like him and built things that mattered. He missed having a place where he belonged, where being smart and caring about details was normal instead of weird. The way his voice cracked when he said he'd never find that again made my heart break in a whole new way. Helena called 2 days later, saying she'd organized a meeting with parents of victims who wanted to discuss next steps. The community center room was packed, maybe 30 parents, all dealing with what happened to their daughters. When Helena introduced Joey and explained his role in exposing everything, the room split hard. One father actually stood up and shook Joey's hand, saying his daughter finally felt safe knowing someone cared enough to stop it. But then a mother near the back called Joey as bad as Larry, saying he traumatized innocent kids for his hero complex. Another parent said Joey should be in jail for what he put their family through. Helena tried to keep things focused on the legal case, but the meeting turned into parents yelling at each other about whether Joey was a hero or a criminal. We left through the back door when someone threatened to call the police on us just for being there. The next morning, Emerson sent out a district-wide email announcing a listening session for concerned parents, but the registration form made it clear only pre-screened questions would be allowed. Helena told us to sign up anyway, because sometimes the real conversations happened in the parking lot after official meetings ended. She was already planning which parents to approach privately about joining our lawsuit. 3 days later, Gustavo called with an update on the federal investigation. They'd found evidence of Larry's behavior at 2 previous schools. Same pattern every time. Complaints getting buried, and him moving on with clean references. Smart move bringing up those old reports when the principal tried playing the confidentiality card, he commented. Nothing makes paperwork suddenly become public interest quite like catching someone in their own rules. Helena sending those preservation letters to board members' homes. The investigation was expanding to include administrators at multiple districts, but he couldn't share more details yet. He said these cases took time to build properly, especially when they involved multiple jurisdictions and dozens of victims across several years. Meanwhile, CIA's accommodation request went through without any announcement, just a quiet approval letter saying she could do independent study for PE instead of using the locker room. But she still walked to my car every afternoon, grabbing my arm the second she saw me and not letting go until we got home. She'd started sleeping on our couch most nights, telling her parents she was helping Joey with homework, but really just needing to be somewhere she felt safe. Small victories, like keeping one kid from daily panic attacks, felt hollow when so many others were still scared to even walk past the pool area. Jamal called that weekend, saying another parent had shared school board emails they'd gotten through a different records request. He found the phrase, minimized district exposure, in multiple messages about Larry's situation, always in discussions about how to handle complaints quietly. The board members kept talking about liability and insurance costs instead of student safety. One email actually said they needed to avoid creating a paper trail that could be used against them later. My anger turned into something harder and colder reading those words, knowing they'd chosen protecting themselves over protecting kids. That night, Joey finally talked about the guilt he'd been carrying since the fake shooting. He said he could still see his classmates' faces when they thought there was a real shooter, the way they cried and shook and held each other. He felt sick knowing he caused that fear, but he refused to apologize for the outcome, because those cameras would still be there if he hadn't acted. He owned both parts of what he did, the harm and the help, accepting the moral complexity of his choice in a way that showed more maturity than any administrator in this whole mess. Helena used all this information to file our formal Title IX complaint the next week, laying out how the district repeatedly failed to investigate reports of sexual harassment and assault. She started scheduling interviews with swimmers willing to talk about their experiences, and each story added weight to our case. Girls described feeling watched, finding excuses to skip practice, changing in bathroom stalls instead of the locker room because something felt wrong, even if they couldn't prove it. Their parents cried hearing details their daughters had been too scared to share before. Every testimony made me more determined to make the district pay for what they'd allowed to happen. The expulsion decision came exactly 5 business days later, upheld with no changes, despite all Joey's documentation of his reports. 2 days later, Emerson called, asking to meet privately at a coffee shop downtown. He looked tired, sitting across from me, stirring his coffee while avoiding eye contact. He leaned forward and told me the district's insurance company was actually calling all the shots on their legal strategy. They were more worried about liability payouts than fixing anything. I told him those insurance executives never watched their son lose everything for doing the right thing. His face went red, but he just nodded and left money for both our coffees. That Friday, Gustavo organized a briefing at the federal building for all the victims' families. The conference room filled with parents and their daughters, some girls as young as 11. He explained how the criminal process would work, walking through court procedures step by step. He showed slides about victim impact statements and what to expect during testimony. Looking around that room at all those damaged kids made my chest tight with anger. Some girls sat pressed against their mothers, not making eye contact with anyone. Others stared at the floor the whole time. One girl started crying when Gustavo mentioned evidence collection and had to leave with her dad. These weren't just case numbers or statistics. They were real kids whose lives got torn apart while adults protected each other. The following Monday, we started therapy with Samira Fraser at her office near the hospital. She specialized in something called trauma from institutional betrayal. Joey sat stiff in the waiting room chair, arms crossed. He didn't want to be there, but agreed to try learning ways to handle the anxiety that kept him awake most nights. Samira had this calm way of talking that made even Joey relax a little. She didn't push him to talk about feelings right away. Instead, she taught him breathing exercises and something called grounding techniques. She gave us homework sheets to practice together at home. Joey rolled his eyes, but took them anyway. Meanwhile, Jamal had been digging through public records for weeks. He called that Wednesday with something big. Every single one of Larry's previous resignations included non-disclosure agreements with suspicious timing. He'd leave right after complaints started getting serious. The districts would pay him to go away quietly and sign papers promising not to sue. The districts would pay him to go away quietly and sign papers promising not to sue. And they'd give him neutral references so he could get hired somewhere else. The pattern went back 15 years across 4 different schools. It was never about protecting kids. It was always about protecting the district's reputation and budget. During our 3rd therapy session, Samira had us do this exercise where we wrote down our biggest fears. Joey stared at his paper for 20 minutes before writing anything. When he finally shared it, his voice cracked. He said his biggest fear wasn't about college or his career being ruined. It was that everyone would always see him as the dangerous kid who brought a gun to the school. That label would follow him forever, no matter what the truth was. People would Google his name years from now, and that's all they'd find. The kid who staged a fake shooting, not the kid who tried to protect others, not the kid who reported abuse multiple times. Just the dangerous one with a gun. A week later, the formal expulsion appeal decision arrived by certified mail. Helena came over to read it with us. They upheld the expulsion again, but opened this tiny window for one more appeal in 60 days. Helena said we'd keep fighting through every possible channel. Joey just shrugged and said, maybe it was better to let it go. He seemed almost relieved to stop hoping for something that probably wouldn't happen. Helena wasn't giving up, though. She filed subpoenas for Larry's complete hiring records from all his previous schools. The district immediately filed a motion to quash, claiming something called executive privilege. They said personnel records were confidential and couldn't be released. Helena laughed when she read their filing. She said they were scared of what those records would show. The legal chess game dragged on with motions and countermotions. Each filing cost money and time while nothing actually changed. I was exhausted just trying to keep track of all the different cases and deadlines. Saturday afternoon, I was buying groceries when a woman approached me near the frozen foods. I recognized her from swim meets, but couldn't remember her name. She looked around nervously before pulling me aside. Her daughter had reported concerns about feeling watched last year. She'd gone to the principal directly. Nothing happened except her daughter got moved to a different PE period. She was too scared to go public now, but wanted me to know we weren't alone. Other parents had tried to raise concerns and got shut down, too. She squeezed my hand and walked away before I could even respond. The district's listening session happened that Tuesday night in the high school auditorium. They'd sent out rules saying only pre-approved questions would be allowed. Parents had to submit them in writing 3 days before, but when the meeting started, nobody followed those rules. Parents stood up shouting questions about safety protocols and background checks. One dad demanded to know how many other complaints got buried. A mom asked why Coach Williams still had a job after dismissing girls' concerns. The crowd got louder with each non-answer from the board. Emerson stood at the microphone, sweating through his suit jacket. His hands shook holding his prepared statement. Finally, he gave up on the script and promised they'd hire an external investigator to review everything. The crowd kept yelling, but at least it was something. The next morning, Gustavo called to manage expectations about this external investigator. They wouldn't have access to any of the sealed federal evidence yet. The criminal case took priority, and nothing could compromise that. The investigator would only see what the district chose to share with them. Real accountability would take months, or maybe years. The system moved at its own slow pace, while kids suffered. Right then, Joey heard me on the phone and just shook his head. He knew nothing would really change. That weekend, Joey finally admitted he'd been dodging his friends for weeks because he didn't know how to act normal around them anymore. He'd ignored texts from his robotics team and made excuses when they wanted to hang out. I suggested we start small, with just pizza and video games at our house next Friday. Joey agreed, but I could see the anxiety, how his shoulders tensed up. 3 of his closest friends came over, and at first, everyone just sat there awkwardly holding game controllers. Then, one kid made a joke about the school's new metal detectors being slower than dial-up internet, and Joey actually laughed. They played games for hours, and nobody mentioned the incident, or MIT, or anything heavy. When they left, Joey seemed lighter somehow, like maybe he could still have pieces of his old life. Monday morning, Jamal's new article hit the front page of the local paper, and my phone started buzzing immediately. The district playing hot potato with Larry